Hello there, and welcome to my presentation on women's roles from the Elizabethan era to now. Today, we're going to discuss what roles men and women had during the Elizabethan era, analyze both past and recent literary works that touch upon gender roles, compare and contrast the topic's previous ideals to modern ideals, and end with a reasonable conclusion. Let's get started. First, let's talk about some background information. For as long as people can remember, men were, and still are, considered as the superior race between the two prominent genders that exist in the human species. Now, the reason why I say that men still are deemed as the superior race is because there are people today who still believe in this concept. In their eyes, men are seen as stronger, smarter, and more capable of handling jobs or other serious matters. On the other hand, we have women, who were and still are seen as subpar and inferior to the male race. And through the same eyes of the people who see men to be the better group among the two sexes, they believe women to be weaker in terms of physical strength, not being as keen or sharp-minded, and unable to perform big tasks as a whole. This kind of outlook on the genders is most present from the Elizabethan era to today. One very common example is the man having to go to work while being in charge of the household his family lives in, and the woman is left to bear children and raise them while acting as the stay-home parent. All of this information leads me to forming this thesis. My thesis states, the female race is treated unfairly throughout the course of history and should be considered as equals to the male race. Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Let's go over this. The main aspect we're going to focus on is the relationship between two characters, Petruchio and Catherine. Petruchio is a man looking for a wealthy wife, and Catherine happens to be one, but she is known to be an ill-tempered woman who likes to argue. However, Petruchio did not care about what kind of personality she had because he only focused on how rich Catherine was. So Petruchio forced Catherine to marry him, and from that point on, it seemed as though Catherine's fate was sealed. After Catherine's submission to marriage, her whole attitude completely changed. Petruchio takes Catherine to his country house to basically quote-unquote tame her and make her into a slave until she changes into a better person. And by that I mean Petruchio does not allow Catherine to eat or sleep for several days. This leads her to accept the role of a housewife, and that means listening to her husband with no questions being asked. And at a meeting with some guests, Petruchio says, "She is my good, my chattels, she is my house, my household stuff, my field, my barn, my horse, my ox, my ass, my anything." This quote is supposed to be Petruchio's way of saying how much Catherine means to him, but it sounds like she is just another piece of his property. Although Petruchio's methods did technically help Catherine change for the better, by not making her ill-tempered anymore, that is, there should have been another solution in helping her because no one would willingly go through what she had experienced in order to change. Women back then may have been okay with accepting the terms of the husband since they were used to it, but the women of today's society would definitely not put up with any of Petruchio's ways, even if it was meant to help them for their own good. Honestly, what Petruchio should have done was talk things out with his newfound wife and try to understand what she was going through. But instead, he manipulated her and treated her like a pet who does not receive proper love and care from the owner, and that forced her to change into someone of his liking. Next up is Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now there's actually a lot to say about this novel when it comes to gender roles in general, but I'll try and keep things brief. To give some context, Dracula is about Dracula the vampire's journey from Transylvania to England, and he wants to find new blood and spread the vampiric curse, meaning that he wants to turn other people into vampires. The book's head setting is the Victorian era, and one of the main themes of Dracula is sexual repression. The book demonstrates this through comparing Victorian women to the female vampires in the story. During the Victorian era, women were sexually repressed because of the ways of their society. Acting in a lustful or sexual manner goes against the idea of the ideal Victorian woman, where they are supposed to remain pure and beautiful. On the other hand, there are the female vampires, who get to experience and show their sexual side of themselves while not giving a care in the world because they are allowed that kind of freedom. An example of this happening would be the scene involving a character named Jonathan Harker, a prisoner in Dracula's castle who is being tempted to have sexual relations with one of the vampires. In the following quote, he says, "I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, closed my eyes in a languorous ecstasy, and waited with a beating heart." I also want to mention that men were sexually repressed too at the time, hence making Harker, a Victorian man, feel uneasy around the vampire. Unfortunately, just because men had to be sexually repressed along with women, that does not make them weaker, nor did that form the idea of women standing on the same level as men. Men were still seen as the stronger and more powerful being out of the two sexes during the Victorian era. And it is believed that when women expressed their freedom over something, men would most of the time challenge or take it. This kind of perspective can be shown through two other characters named Lucy and Arthur. The two are soon to be married, but one of them meets a tragic end. Lucy is known to be a powerful and angelic young woman, but she then turns into a vampire, and her whole personality flips. She goes from a pure and sweet girl to an inhuman with unholy desires. And when the transformed Lucy and normal Arthur meet, Arthur drives a wooden stake through Lucy's heart and kills her after she tries seducing him. This represents the quote-unquote restoration of the corrupt gender balance where men dominated and controlled the desires of women. As a whole, Dracula is a controversial novel, mainly for challenging the sexuality of gender roles, especially women. And even though it may seem like women were living great lives for being pure and beautiful beings back then, that does not necessarily mean that they enjoyed being that way. They had restricted freedom, and nobody likes that. They were not able to properly express their sexuality, but at the same time, that does not make the actions of the vampire woman acceptable. Those vampires took things to an extreme, making normal men and women feel uncomfortable in their presence. In today's society, things have gotten a lot better when it comes to showing off a person's sexuality in public, including women. Women are now allowed to be whatever kind of sexual identity they want, whether it is being heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, or transgender, as long as they do not cause a sensible public outrage. For the third piece, we'll quickly talk about the article, Women Transitioning to Leadership Roles Receive Less Support Than Men, by Caitlin Mullen. This article came out earlier this week, and as the title suggests, women are still not getting equal treatment compared to men in another aspect of a society they are involved in. According to Ms. Mullen, she states, transitioning to a leadership role in 2020 featured less support in the form of skills, training, and feedback, and women in particular received less support than men. A recent report made by the DDI, the Development Dimensional International Organization, an international human resources and leadership development consultancy, found that men are 13% more likely to receive leadership skills training than women, and 19% more likely to receive a formal assessment. They also claim that men are 22% more likely than women to be paired up with a formal mentor. Because of this lack of support, women are not advancing in management and are experiencing higher stress levels. To try and resolve this issue, the DDI recommended organizations to fully inspect their leadership development processes with gender equity in mind, considering equity in promotions, in the promotion candidate pool, and in leaders in the executive succession plan. This may sound like a good idea, but it is possible that those in charge of these organizations will not fulfill these expectations and continue to favor men over women. This is utterly preposterous. A woman can be as good of a leader as any other man, perhaps being even better in some cases. People need to get their heads in the game, especially because we are currently going through a pandemic right now, leading to business becoming tight for organizations and not receiving much leadership support as a whole. Only we the people can work together and put a stop to this decline of leadership support, as well as let women get as much reception and attention in the leadership department as men. We have now reached the conclusion. Overall, women deserve better from the societies they are placed in, and they should be deemed as equals when being compared to men. It's been mostly about men, but now we have strong, smart, and capable women by our side. People throughout the course of time have come a long way and have made so much progress in many different ways and fields of life. Technology has advanced, populations have grown, cities and civilizations have been created, nations and different cultures have come together. If we can accomplish all of these tremendous things, we can surely accomplish learning, truly learning, to accept one another, no matter the age, race, or gender. And to really end things off, here is my works cited page. Thank you for watching and learning about my presentation. And Mrs. Matral, Thank you for all that you have done for me and for everyone.